My family keeps pressuring me to forgive and forget about my childhood trauma, but I can't, and I'm starting to question if I was ever the problem, or if they just didn't want the truth. I never thought I'd be writing this on Reddit, but here I am at 28 years old, finally ready to talk about something that's been eating at me for over a decade. When I was 12, our neighbor Armin began what I now understand was grooming behavior. He was 17, seemed cool and mature to my young mind, and lived 3 houses down with his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident. Everyone in our tight-knit community felt sorry for him and praised his grandmother, Dorothy, for taking him in. Armin would hang around our yard when I was playing outside, always finding excuses to talk to me. He'd compliment my drawings, bring me candy, and gradually began suggesting we keep our special friendship secret. The abuse escalated over several months. He convinced me that what was happening was normal, that older kids taught younger kids things, and that my parents wouldn't understand our friendship. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents, my mother's first reaction wasn't to comfort me or call the police. Instead, she asked what I had done to encourage him. She worried about what the neighbors would think, what it would do to Dorothy's reputation, and whether we were misunderstanding innocent teenage behavior. My father initially seemed more supportive, but when Dorothy came over in tears begging my parents not to involve authorities, explaining that Armin was already traumatized from losing his parents, my father wavered. The community rallied around Dorothy and Armin. People I'd known my entire life began treating my family differently, whispering when we passed, and several families stopped inviting us to community gatherings. The pressure became unbearable. My mother would cry daily, saying I was tearing apart our neighborhood and hurting a boy who'd already suffered enough. My younger brother Aaron started getting teased at school because kids had heard their parents talking about our family's drama. My parents eventually convinced me not to press charges, promising they'd make sure Armin stayed away from me. But Armin didn't stay away. He'd ride his bike past our house, wave at me through my bedroom window, and leave notes in our mailbox saying he missed our talks. When I told my parents, they said I was being paranoid and that he was just trying to be friendly. The gaslighting was constant. Every reaction I had was labeled as overblown, dramatic, or attention-seeking. At 13, I developed severe anxiety and trust issues. I couldn't sleep without checking my bedroom door multiple times. I stopped playing outside and became withdrawn at school. When my parents took me to our family doctor, Dr. Harper, he suggested I was going through typical teenage growing pains and prescribed mild anxiety medication. No one mentioned therapy or trauma counseling. The breaking point came when I was 14. Armin had graduated high school and was working at the local grocery store where my mother shopped. She came home one day and casually mentioned that Armin had asked about me, said he missed seeing me around the neighborhood, and seemed like he was doing well for himself. She suggested I might consider forgiving him since he'd clearly matured and was contributing positively to the community. I lost it. I screamed at her that I would never forgive him, that what he did wasn't something you just get over, and that her caring more about the neighbors' opinions than my safety proved she'd never truly believed me. She cried and said I was being cruel, that forgiveness would help me heal, and that holding on to anger was only hurting myself. That's when the real manipulation began. My extended family got involved. My grandmother, Luciana, called to lecture me about the importance of forgiveness in our Catholic faith. My uncle Miguel suggested that perhaps I'd misremembered or exaggerated what happened since I was so young. My Aunt Rosa reminded me that Armin had lost his parents and deserved compassion. They organized what they called an intervention at my grandmother's house. I was 15, sitting in a circle with aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, all telling me why I needed to forgive Armin for my own good and for the sake of family harmony. They'd invited Dorothy and Armin. He sat there looking remorseful, apologizing for any misunderstanding, and saying he'd always cared about me like a little sister. I was expected to accept his apology and hug him. When I refused and tried to leave, my grandmother blocked the door and said I wasn't going anywhere until I learned to behave like a proper young lady. I had a panic attack right there in her living room. Instead of recognizing this as a trauma response, they decided I was being manipulative and attention-seeking. My mother grounded me for 2 weeks for embarrassing the family. During this time, Armin began showing up at our church, sitting a few pews behind us, nodding politely when my parents acknowledged him. My mother would comment afterward about how nice it was to see him getting right with God. I stopped going to church entirely, which caused another family crisis about my rebellious attitude and lack of faith. High school became my escape. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, anything to stay away from home as much as possible. I made friends with other kids who felt like outsiders, but I never told them about Armin. The shame and confusion were too overwhelming. I'd started to wonder if maybe I was remembering things wrong, if maybe I was being too sensitive. At 16, I got my first job at a bookstore downtown. The independence felt incredible, and my manager, Lisa, was a woman in her 30s who seemed to genuinely care about her young employees. One day, after Armin showed up at the store asking my coworkers if I was working, Lisa sat me down. She'd noticed how panicked I became when certain men came into the store, how I'd find excuses to go to the back room or suddenly need to organize inventory. For the first time in 4 years, an adult listened to me without interrupting, without making excuses for Armin, without questioning my memory or motives. Lisa explained that what happened to me was sexual abuse, that my family's reaction was unfortunately common but completely wrong, and that my trauma responses were normal. She gave me information about free counseling services and helped me understand that I had every right to refuse contact with Armin. Starting therapy at 17 was life-changing, but it also created new conflicts at home. My therapist, Dr. Chun, explained concepts like gaslighting, trauma bonding, and family dysfunction. She helped me understand that forgiveness isn't something that can be forced, and that protecting myself from my abuser wasn't cruel or vindictive. When I shared some of these insights with my family, they became defensive and hostile. My mother accused my therapist of putting ideas in my head and turning me against my family. My father said therapy was making me worse, not better, and that I was using psychology terms to avoid taking responsibility for my attitude. The pressure intensified as I prepared for college. Armin had gotten engaged to a girl from the next town over, and my family saw this as proof that he'd moved on and was a changed person. They wanted me to attend his engagement party to show there were no hard feelings. When I refused, they said I was being petty and holding the whole family hostage with my grudge. College finally gave me physical distance from the situation, but the emotional manipulation continued through phone calls and visits home. Every holiday became a battlefield. My family would update me on Armin's life, his wedding, his new job, his volunteer work at the church. They'd emphasize how well-respected he was in the community and how sad it was that I couldn't find it in my heart to forgive. Update, posted 2 months ago. Thank you to everyone who responded to my original post. The support meant more than you know. I wanted to update you on what's been happening since then. My brother Aaron, who's now 25, reached out to me after seeing changes in how I interact with the family. We had coffee last month, and for the first time, he admitted that he'd always felt something was wrong with how our parents handled the Armin situation. He said he was too young to understand it then, but looking back, he could see how much I was hurting and how dismissive everyone was of my feelings. Aaron revealed something that shook me to my core. When he was 14, about 2 years after my abuse, Armin had approached him at the community center and made inappropriate comments about his body and development. Aaron said he immediately felt uncomfortable and left, but when he mentioned it to our parents, they brushed it off as Armin being awkward socially due to his trauma. Aaron never told me because our parents made him feel like he was overreacting, just like they'd done with me. He's carried guilt about this for years, wondering if speaking up might have helped validate my experiences. We both cried during that conversation, finally able to support each other without family interference. This revelation made me realize that Armin likely had other victims, and that my family's enabling had potentially put other children at risk. I contacted Dr. Chun, my former therapist, and she helped me connect with a support group for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. In the group, I met others whose families had similar reactions to their abuse. The pattern was depressingly common: families protecting the abuser's reputation, pressuring victims to forgive prematurely, using religious or cultural values to justify dismissing trauma. Hearing these stories helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't unique, but it also reinforced how wrong it was. Meanwhile, my family's pressure campaign has escalated. My grandmother Luciana had a minor heart attack last month, and during her recovery, she asked to see me. When I visited, she spent an hour telling me how much she regretted the way things had been handled and how she hoped we could all find peace before she passed away. But then she revealed the real purpose of her request. Armin had recently divorced and was going through a difficult time. Dorothy, his grandmother, was in failing health, and Armin had been asking about me, wondering if enough time had passed for us to have a conversation. My grandmother wanted to arrange a meeting where Armin could properly apologize and I could finally find closure through forgiveness. I told her absolutely not. I explained that I'd found closure through therapy and distance, not through forced reconciliation with my abuser. She became upset and said I was being cold-hearted, that Armin had suffered enough, and that my unwillingness to forgive was preventing our family from healing. When I left that day, she called my mother crying about how stubborn and vindictive I'd become. This triggered a series of phone calls from various family members, each trying their own approach to convince me to meet with Armin. Some used guilt, others used religious arguments, and a few tried reverse psychology, suggesting I must still have feelings for Armin if I couldn't face him after all these years. The most hurtful call came from my Aunt Rosa, who suggested that my current relationship struggles stemmed from my inability to forgive and move on. She wasn't entirely wrong about my relationship issues, but not for the reasons she thought. Update posted 6 weeks ago. I need to share what happened at my cousin Sophia's wedding last weekend because I'm still processing it all. Some of you had warned me in the comments that my family might try to ambush me with Armin at a family event, and unfortunately, you were right. Sophia is my Uncle Miguel's daughter, and while we're not particularly close, I couldn't miss her wedding without causing a major family rift. I spent weeks beforehand setting boundaries with my parents about Armin not being invited, and they assured me he wouldn't be there since he wasn't related to Sophia's side of the family. I should have trusted my instincts instead of their promises. Armin was at the wedding, not as a guest, but as part of the catering staff. Apparently, he'd started a small catering business after his divorce, and Dorothy had recommended him to my uncle through their church connections. My family swore they didn't know, but too many things lined up perfectly for this to be coincidental. I first saw him during the cocktail hour, carrying a tray of appetizers. Our eyes met across the room, and he smiled like we were old friends. I immediately felt that familiar panic response, my chest tightening and my hands starting to shake. I grabbed my boyfriend Arnold's arm and told him we needed to leave. Arnold knew about my history with Armin, though not all the details. He could see I was having a panic response and was ready to leave immediately, but before we could make it to the exit, my mother intercepted us. She begged me not to cause a scene, said Armin was just there working and wouldn't bother me, and reminded me that this was Sophia's special day. I tried to stay for Sophia's sake, but Armin kept appearing wherever I was. When I went to the bathroom, he was in the hallway waiting with towels and mints. When I stepped outside for air, he was there setting up the dessert station on the patio. Each time, he'd nod politely or make small talk about the beautiful wedding, acting like everything was perfectly normal. The breaking point came during the father-daughter dance. I was sitting at our table trying to enjoy this sweet moment when Armin appeared beside me with a plate of wedding cake. He set it down and quietly said, "I've wanted to talk to you for years. I know I hurt you when we were kids, and I'd really like the chance to make things right." I stood up so fast I knocked over my water glass and loudly said, "Stay away from me." The music continued, but nearby tables turned to look. Armin put his hands up in a peaceful gesture and said, "I understand you're still upset, but we're both adults now. Don't you think it's time we put the past behind us?" Arnold stepped between us and firmly told Armin to back off. My father appeared and tried to de-escalate, saying we could discuss this later, but I was done. I told Armin, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "You sexually abused me when I was 12 years old. I don't owe you forgiveness, conversation, or anything else. Leave me alone." The dance floor went silent. Sophia stopped dancing with her father and stared at our table. Armin's face flushed, and he quickly walked away, but the damage was done. I'd finally said out loud, in front of dozens of family members and friends, what had really happened all those years ago. My family's reaction was swift and predictable. My mother burst into tears, saying I'd ruined Sophia's wedding. My Uncle Miguel demanded I apologize to Armin and the other guests for making such serious accusations. My grandmother Luciana, despite her weak heart, somehow found the energy to lecture me about airing family business in public. But something unexpected happened too. Sophia's maid of honor, Carmen, approached me during the chaos. She said she'd suspected something was wrong with Armin based on how uncomfortable she'd felt around him while he was setting up. 2 other women at nearby tables came over to say they believed me and were proud of me for speaking up. Arnold and I left immediately, but not before I overheard my uncle telling people that I'd had emotional problems since childhood and that Armin was actually the victim of false accusations. The narrative was already being rewritten. Update, posted 4 weeks ago. The fallout from Sophia's wedding has been intense and eye-opening. I've learned who my real allies are and who prioritizes family image over my safety and well-being. Sophia, surprisingly, called me 3 days after her wedding. I expected her to be furious about the scene at her reception, but instead she apologized. She said she hadn't known Armin would be there and was horrified when she realized what had happened. She'd hired the catering company based on her grandmother Dorothy's recommendation without knowing about my history with Armin. More importantly, Sophia revealed that Armin had made her uncomfortable during the wedding planning process. He'd insisted on meeting with her alone to discuss menu details, asked personal questions about her relationship with her fiancé, and made comments about how beautiful she looked in her wedding dress during the final tasting. She'd dismissed these interactions as him being socially awkward, but my outburst made her reconsider. Sophia encouraged me to reach out to other young women in our extended family and community. She suspected Armin might have made inappropriate advances toward others over the years. This was a terrifying thought, but I knew she was right. I started by calling my cousin Isabella, who's 22 and had worked briefly at Armin's catering business the previous summer. Isabella initially denied anything inappropriate had happened, but when I shared my own experience in detail, she broke down crying. Armin had repeatedly made sexual comments about her appearance, found excuses to touch her shoulders and back, and had once cornered her in the catering van to ask if she had a boyfriend. Isabella quit the job after 2 weeks, telling her parents she didn't like the work, but never explaining the real reason. She'd been afraid no one would believe her, especially since Armin was well regarded in the community and she was just a college student looking for summer work. With Isabella's permission, I reached out to 2 other young women who'd worked for Armin. Both had similar stories: inappropriate comments, unwanted touching, personal questions about their relationships and sexual experiences. One girl, Maria, said Armin had offered her extra money to work private parties at his apartment, which made her so uncomfortable she blocked his number. Armed with this information, I finally decided to report Armin to the police. I knew it would be difficult to prove anything after all these years, but I needed to create an official record in case he escalated his behavior with future victims. Detective Rivera, who specializes in sexual crimes, was professional and thorough. She explained that while prosecution would be challenging given the time that had passed, having multiple complainants with similar stories strengthened the case considerably. She encouraged the other women to file their own reports, which Isabella and Maria ultimately did. The investigation is ongoing, but word has spread through our small community. The reactions have been predictably divided. Some people have rallied around Armin, claiming he's being persecuted by vindictive women looking for attention. Others have quietly approached me to share their own suspicions about his behavior over the years. My family's response has been devastating, but not surprising. My parents are furious that I involved law enforcement, saying I've brought shame on our entire family. They're convinced I'm exaggerating or misremembering events from childhood, and that I'm now manipulating other young women into making false accusations. My mother left me several voicemails crying about how I'm destroying the reputation of a man who's already suffered so much loss in his life. She's particularly upset about Dorothy, Armin's grandmother, who's been ostracized by some community members and has had to stop attending church due to the whispers and stares. My father's approach has been different, but equally hurtful. He's taken a legalistic stance, demanding I provide proof of my accusations and questioning why I waited so long to come forward if these incidents really happened. He seems genuinely confused about why I won't just let sleeping dogs lie and move on with my life. The most painful reaction came from my grandmother, Luciana. She called to say that if I continue with this vendetta against Armin, she would be forced to choose between supporting me and maintaining peace in the family. She made it clear which choice she would make. Update, posted 2 weeks ago. I need to share something that's been weighing heavily on my mind since my last update. The investigation into Armin has taken an unexpected turn, and I'm struggling with whether I made the right decision in coming forward. Last week, Detective Rivera called to inform me that Armin had been arrested, not for the historical charges we'd filed, but for current allegations involving a 16-year-old girl named Lucia who worked part-time at the grocery store, where he'd recently gotten a job as a manager. Lucia's mother found inappropriate text messages Armin had sent her daughter, including requests for photos and offers to give her rides home from work when no one else was around. When confronted, Lucia revealed that Armin had been grooming her for months, starting with compliments about her maturity and gradual escalation to sexual topics. The parallels to my own experience were chilling. Armin had used the same tactics, the same language, even some of the same justifications I remembered from when I was 12. The only difference was that Lucia's mother immediately believed her and took action. Detective Rivera said that our prior reports had been crucial in establishing a pattern of behavior. Without our testimonies, Armin might have been able to convince authorities that the situation with Lucia was a misunderstanding or isolated incident. Our courage in coming forward potentially saved this girl from experiencing what I went through. But the arrest has torn our community apart in ways I wasn't prepared for. Dorothy, Armin's grandmother, had a stroke the day after his arrest. She's in the hospital now, and while I know it's not my fault, I can't shake the guilt about her condition. She's 89 years old and raised Armin after his parents died. In her mind, he's still the traumatized little boy she tried to save. My family has united in their condemnation of my actions. They blame me not just for Armin's arrest, but for Dorothy's stroke and for the gossip that's consuming our tight-knit community. My mother actually said that Lucia's situation might have been handled quietly within the family if I hadn't poisoned the well with my accusations first. This comment revealed something that horrified me. My family apparently knew, on some level, that Armin had continued inappropriate behavior over the years. There had been whispers, concerns, young women who quit jobs or avoided certain situations. But rather than protecting potential victims, they'd chosen to protect Armin and maintain the community's stability. My uncle Miguel, Sophia's father, confronted me outside the grocery store last weekend. He was furious, saying I'd destroyed a man's life based on childhood grudges and false memories. When I tried to explain about Lucia and the other victims, he said those situations were completely different and that I was manipulating vulnerable young women to support my own agenda. The encounter became heated, and Miguel actually grabbed my arm while shouting that I needed to admit I was lying and apologize to Dorothy before she died. Several people witnessed this, and someone called the police. Miguel was cited for disorderly conduct, which has only escalated the family drama. My brother Aaron has been my only family support through all of this. He's faced significant pressure to abandon me and side with the family, but he's stood firm. Aaron told me that our father threatened to cut off his access to family events and gatherings if he continues defending me. Aaron's response was that he'd rather be excluded from family functions than participate in protecting abusers. The stress has taken a serious toll on my relationship with Arnold. He's been supportive throughout this ordeal, but the constant family drama and community conflict are exhausting for both of us. We've been together for 2 years, and he's watched me go from someone who occasionally struggled with trust issues to someone who's constantly dealing with legal proceedings, family confrontations, and death threats from Armin's supporters. Yes, death threats. 3 different people have left voicemails saying I should be ashamed of myself for destroying an innocent man's life, and that I deserve whatever happens to me for being a liar and a troublemaker. I've reported these to the police, but there's little they can do without more specific threats. Arnold suggested we move to another city where we could start fresh, away from all this toxicity. Part of me is tempted, but I know that running away would validate my family's belief that I'm unstable and vindictive. It would also abandon other potential victims who might find courage in my example. Dr. Chun, my former therapist, has been helping me process these developments. She reminds me that trauma responses include not just the original abuse, but the secondary trauma of not being believed and supported by those who should protect you. What I'm experiencing now is a continuation of that secondary trauma, amplified by the community conflict. She's also helped me understand that my family's reaction is classic dysfunction. They've invested years in a narrative that protects their image and avoids uncomfortable truths. Accepting that Armin is a predator would mean acknowledging their own complicity in enabling him and dismissing multiple victims over the years. Update, posted 1 week ago. The trial preparation has been emotionally exhausting, but I've learned so much about myself and my family's dynamics through this process. I wanted to share some developments because many of you have been following my story and offering support. Armin's defense attorney has been aggressive in trying to discredit all of his accusers. They've hired a private investigator who's been digging into our backgrounds, looking for anything that could be used to question our credibility or motivations. The PI contacted my college roommate, former employers, even my high school guidance counselor, fishing for information about my mental health, relationship history, or any grudges I might hold. This invasion of privacy has been traumatic, but it's also revealed how desperate Armin's legal team is becoming. If their case were strong, they wouldn't need to resort to character assassination tactics against multiple victims spanning different time periods. More importantly, 3 additional women have come forward since Armin's arrest. 2 are women in their 20s who encountered Armin at various jobs over the past 5 years, and 1 is now in her 30s but was abused by Armin when she was 14, around the time my own abuse was happening. This last revelation hit me particularly hard. While my family was pressuring me to forgive and forget, while they were praising Armin's transformation and community contributions, he was simultaneously abusing another child. Her name is Valentina, and she's agreed to testify at trial despite the personal cost. Valentina's story is remarkably similar to mine, but with one crucial difference. When she told her parents about Armin's abuse, they immediately contacted police and pressed charges. However, Armin's family hired an expensive lawyer who successfully argued that Valentina was a troubled teenager with a history of lying, and that she was making false accusations because Armin had rejected her advances. The charges were dropped, Valentina's family was ostracized from the community, and they eventually moved to another state. Valentina has carried the guilt and shame of not being believed for over a decade, just like I have. Finding each other through this legal process has been both healing and heartbreaking. My family's reaction to these new accusations has been to double down on their denial. My mother now claims that Armin is clearly being targeted by a conspiracy of disturbed women who are jealous of his success or seeking financial gain through false allegations. She's actually started a prayer group at church specifically focused on supporting Dorothy and praying for Armin's vindication. This prayer group has become a source of community division. Some parishioners have joined, but others have quietly distanced themselves from my mother's crusade. Father Rodriguez, our parish priest, has tried to remain neutral, but I've heard through Aaron that he's privately expressed concerns about the way my family has handled the situation over the years. The most surreal development came when my Aunt Rosa called to offer me money to drop the charges and leave town. She didn't frame it as a bribe, but as family assistance to help me start fresh somewhere else and move on with my life. When I refused, she became angry and accused me of enjoying the attention and drama I was creating. This conversation made me realize that my family has moved beyond denial into active complicity. They're not just refusing to believe Armin is guilty, they're actively working to silence his victims and protect him from consequences. The money offer, the prayer group, the character assassination attempts, these are coordinated efforts to obstruct justice. Arnold and I have been attending couples counseling to work through the stress this situation has put on our relationship. Our therapist, Dr. Harper, different from the family doctor who dismissed my childhood concerns, has helped Arnold understand the complexity of family trauma and why I can't simply walk away from this situation. Arnold admitted that he initially thought I should just cut contact with my family and move on with my life. He couldn't understand why I felt compelled to pursue legal action when it was clearly causing me so much pain. But through counseling, he's come to understand that healing from family betrayal requires setting boundaries and refusing to enable continued dysfunction. Dr. Harper has also helped me recognize that my difficulty trusting people, which has affected all my relationships, including my relationship with Arnold, stems not just from Armin's abuse, but from my family's consistent invalidation of my experiences. Learning to trust my own perceptions despite constant gaslighting has been one of the hardest parts of this journey. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. All of Armin's victims will need to testify about our experiences, knowing that his defense team will try to discredit and humiliate us. The prosecutor, Ms. Gutierrez, has been preparing us for the tactics they'll likely use, but it's still terrifying. What keeps me going is the knowledge that speaking up potentially saved Lucia from years of abuse and has encouraged other victims to come forward. Breaking the cycle of silence and enabling is more important than maintaining family relationships built on protecting abusers and silencing survivors. Final update posted today. I wanted to provide a final update on my situation because so many of you have been following along and offering support throughout this journey. The trial concluded last week, and I'm still processing everything that happened. Armin was convicted on multiple charges related to his abuse of Lucia, and on 2 counts related to his historical abuse of me and Valentina. The other victims' cases were harder to prosecute due to the time that had passed, but their testimonies helped establish a clear pattern of predatory behavior that strengthened the overall case. The trial was even more difficult than I'd anticipated. Armin's defense attorney painted all of us as unstable women with various motivations for making false accusations. They suggested I was seeking revenge for childhood rejection, that Valentina was jealous of Armin's success, and that Lucia was trying to cover up her own inappropriate behavior at work. But the prosecutor, Ms. Gutierrez, masterfully demonstrated the consistency in our stories and the clear pattern of Armin's grooming techniques. She showed how he systematically targeted vulnerable young women, used the same manipulation tactics across decades, and relied on his reputation in the community to protect him from consequences. The most powerful moment came when Lucia testified. She was calm, detailed, and unshakable under cross-examination. When Armin's attorney suggested she had misinterpreted friendly workplace interactions, Lucia pulled out her phone and read the explicit text messages he'd sent her. The courtroom was silent as she read his requests for photos and his detailed descriptions of what he wanted to do to her. Armin was sentenced to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 5. It's not as long as I'd hoped, but it's substantial enough to protect other potential victims and validate our experiences. The judge specifically noted that Armin had used his position in the community to access and groom victims, and that his manipulation of family dynamics to silence previous accusations demonstrated sophisticated predatory behavior. My family's reaction to the conviction has been exactly what I expected, but still painful. My mother attended every day of the trial, sitting behind Armin and glaring at me when I testified. After the verdict, she approached me outside the courthouse and said, "I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed an innocent man and killed his grandmother." Dorothy had passed away 2 days before the trial ended. While I felt genuinely sad about her death, I couldn't accept responsibility for it. She'd spent years enabling Armin's behavior and intimidating his victims into silence. Her death was tragic, but it wasn't caused by victims finally speaking their truth. My father's reaction was different, but equally hurtful. He called me the night after the conviction to say that while he accepted the jury's decision, he couldn't understand why I hadn't just moved on with my life years ago instead of pursuing revenge through the legal system. He said my actions had torn our family apart and that he wasn't sure we could ever repair the damage. The conversation with my father revealed something I'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He wasn't just struggling to accept Armin's guilt. He was angry at me for disrupting the family's comfortable denial. My pursuit of justice had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths they'd spent years avoiding. My uncle Miguel sent me a text message calling me a vindictive liar who had perjured herself in court. My Aunt Rosa blocked my number entirely. My grandmother Luciana died 3 months ago, still believing I was destroying the family with false accusations. I wasn't allowed to attend her funeral, but there have been positive developments too. My brother Aaron has grown stronger throughout this process and has become an advocate for survivors in our community. He started a support group for people dealing with family rejection after reporting abuse, and he's been accepted to graduate school for social work with a focus on trauma counseling. Sophia has remained supportive and has become something of an activist in our community, working to educate families about the signs of grooming and the importance of believing survivors. She's faced criticism from some family members, but she stood firm in her support for me and other victims. Most surprisingly, several community members who initially supported Armin have quietly approached me to apologize. They've admitted they had concerns about his behavior over the years, but chose to ignore their instincts to maintain social harmony. Some have shared their own stories of inappropriate interactions with Armin that they'd previously dismissed or rationalized. The young women who worked for Armin's catering business have all received counseling and support. Isabella is doing well in college and has become an advocate for workplace safety education. Maria is considering law school, partly inspired by watching Ms. Gutierrez advocate for victims during the trial. Arnold and I are doing much better now that the legal proceedings are over. The couple's counseling helped us work through the trust issues and communication problems that the family conflict had created in our relationship. He's gained a deeper understanding of family trauma and has been incredibly supportive throughout the trial process. We're planning to move to a different city next year, not because I'm running away, but because we want to start fresh somewhere we can build our own life without the constant weight of community conflict and family dysfunction. Aaron will visit us regularly, and we'll maintain the relationships that have proven genuine and supportive. I've continued therapy throughout this entire process, and Dr. Chun has helped me understand that healing from family betrayal is a long journey. I may never have a relationship with most of my extended family, but I've learned to build chosen family with people who consistently support and believe me. The hardest lesson has been accepting that I can't control my family's reactions or force them to acknowledge their mistakes. I can only control my own actions and decisions. Choosing to speak up about Armin's abuse, despite the personal cost, was the right decision because it protected other potential victims and broke a cycle of silence that had enabled him for years. To anyone reading this who's struggling with similar family pressure to forgive an abuser or stay silent about trauma, trust your instincts. Your safety and well-being matter more than family harmony or community reputation. Speaking truth to power is never easy, but it's sometimes necessary to protect yourself and others. The process has been painful, but I've gained something invaluable: the certainty that I can trust my own perceptions and advocate for my own safety, even when everyone around me is pressuring me to stay quiet. That self-trust has extended into other areas of my life and relationships, and I finally feel like I'm living authentically instead of constantly second-guessing myself. Armin will serve his time, my family will continue their dysfunction without me, and I'll build the life I deserve with people who value truth and support over image management and denial. It's not the ending I hoped for when I was 12 years old and first spoke up about the abuse, but it's the ending that allows me to move forward with integrity and peace.